The blood-red horizon swallowed the last remnants of sunlight as Katherine Hayes stared at the smoldering ruins of what had once been her life. The fire had taken everything: her family ranch, her parents, her brother, and every last possession she had ever called her own. At 22, she stood utterly alone in the vastness of the Montana Territory, 1876, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a silver locket containing a faded family portrait. "Miss, you shouldn't be standing here," a deep voice said from behind her. "The embers might still be dangerous." Katherine didn't turn. "What does it matter?" Her voice was hollow, scraped raw from screaming for help that had come too late. "It matters because you're still breathing," the stranger replied, stepping into her peripheral vision. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Isaiah Evans," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I own the neighboring ranch to the west." "I know who you are," Katherine said flatly. Her father had mentioned the Evans place, a modest operation run by a quiet man who kept to himself. "You're too late to help, Mr. Evans." "For the fire, yes," he agreed solemnly, "but not for you, Miss Hayes." Katherine finally turned to look at him properly. Isaiah Evans was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were worn but clean, his posture speaking of a man accustomed to hard work. "There's nothing left to help," she said, gesturing to the destruction. The barn, the house, the corrals all reduced to ashes. Even the soil seemed scorched beyond recovery. "There's always something left," Isaiah said quietly. "If you'll let me, I can give you shelter for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Katherine wanted to refuse, to curl up in the ashes and join her family. But something in Isaiah's steady gaze made her nod, just once. It wasn't hope; she was far too empty for hope, but perhaps it was the faint human instinct for survival. As Isaiah led her to his horse, neither of them could have imagined that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey spanning years, a journey in which a quiet cowboy would dedicate himself to restoring, piece by careful piece, everything that Katherine Hayes had lost in a single, devastating day. Isaiah's ranch was modest compared to what the Hayes place had been. A small main house, a sturdy barn, and corrals that held about 30 head of cattle. His foreman, an older man named Hank, raised his eyebrows when Isaiah rode in with Katherine, but asked no questions as he took the horse. "The spare room isn't much," Isaiah said as he led her inside, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." Katherine nodded mechanically, following him through a simple but tidy home. The spare room contained a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern hills. It was Spartan, but clean. "I'll find you something to sleep in," Isaiah said, disappearing briefly before returning with a folded nightshirt. "It'll be large, but it's better than nothing until we can get you proper things." "Why are you doing this?" Katherine asked, the first real question she'd managed since he'd found her. Isaiah paused at the door. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because no one should be alone on the worst day of their life." After he left, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, still in her soot-stained dress. She didn't cry; she felt too hollow for tears. Instead, she clutched her locket and stared at the wall until exhaustion pulled her into a mercifully dreamless sleep. Morning brought with it the harsh reality that yesterday hadn't been a nightmare. Katherine woke disoriented in the strange bed, then remembered everything in a crushing wave. Outside her window, she could see Isaiah already at work, moving hay bales into the barn. His movements were efficient, purposeful. After washing her face in the basin provided, Katherine made her way to the kitchen where she found coffee brewing and a simple breakfast laid out. A note beside the plate read, "Eat, I'll be in shortly." She was halfway through forcing down some food when Isaiah entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Sheriff Daniels is riding over later," he said without preamble. "He'll want to talk to you about what happened." Katherine nodded. "It was an accident," she said dully. "The lantern in the barn, my brother was checking on a sick calf. By the time we smelled the smoke." She trailed off. Isaiah sat across from her. "Miss Hayes, Katherine," she interrupted. "Just Katherine now." "Katherine," he amended, "I know this isn't the time to discuss futures, but you should know you have options. There's a stage to Helena on Friday. I can arrange passage if you have family elsewhere." She shook her head. "There's no one." Isaiah nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Then you can stay here until you decide what you want to do. No obligations, no expectations." "I can't accept charity," Katherine said, some spark of her father's pride flaring briefly. "Then work," Isaiah replied matter-of-factly. "I could use help with the books, maybe the cooking. Hank and I aren't particularly skilled in the kitchen." For the first time, something like relief crossed Katherine's face. Having something to do, a purpose, however small, seemed like a lifeline in an ocean of grief. "I can cook," she said, "and I kept my father's ledgers." "Good," Isaiah nodded, rising. "We'll start there." The sheriff's visit later that day confirmed what Katherine had said. The fire was deemed an accident, tragic but not suspicious. What remained of her family had been gathered and would be buried the next day in the small cemetery where her grandparents already rested. "I'm mighty sorry, Miss Hayes," Sheriff Daniels said, hat in hand. "Your daddy was a good man." Katherine nodded, fighting to maintain composure. "Thank you for what you and the others tried to do." After the sheriff left, Isaiah found Katherine on the porch, staring at the distant smudge of smoke still rising from her family's land. "I'll take you to town tomorrow," he said, "for proper clothes and whatever else you might need." "I have no money," she reminded him. Isaiah leaned against the porch railing. "Consider it an advance on your wages." That night, Katherine finally cried deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Isaiah, hearing her through the thin walls, sat at his kitchen table, pouring a small measure of whiskey and staring into it as if it held answers. He barely knew Katherine Hayes, yet something about her strength in the face of such devastating loss stirred something in him. Not pity he sensed she'd hate that, but admiration, and a quiet resolve to help her rebuild. The funeral was a small affair. Most of the neighboring ranchers came, offering condolences and awkward promises of help that Katherine acknowledged with quiet dignity. Isaiah stood slightly apart, observing her straight back and lifted chin, even as her knuckles turned white from gripping her locket. As the last of the mourners departed, Katherine remained by the 3 fresh graves. Isaiah waited patiently by his wagon, giving her the space she needed. Finally, she turned and walked toward him, her eyes dry but filled with a grief so profound it seemed to have no bottom. "I want to go to the ranch," she said. "What's left of it?" Isaiah nodded, helping her onto the wagon bench. The destruction looked even more complete in the clear light of day. Katherine walked through the ruins, occasionally stopping to sift through ashes, finding nothing salvageable. Isaiah followed at a respectful distance, watchful but silent. At what had once been the corner of the house, Katherine suddenly stopped and fell to her knees. When Isaiah approached, he saw she had uncovered a small metal box, its paint bubbled and scorched but its contents protected. Inside were papers, deeds, titles, her father's will. "The strong box," she whispered. "Papa kept it under a floorboard." It wasn't much, but it was something, the first piece of her former life recovered from the ashes. Over the following weeks, Katherine settled into a routine at the Evans Ranch. She cooked meals, kept the books, and gradually took on more responsibilities around the house. Isaiah noticed that she worked with an almost desperate intensity, as if staying busy could keep her grief at bay. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Isaiah broached the subject he'd been considering. "I rode by your land today," he said. "The soil's not as damaged as we feared." "Come spring, it could be worked again." Katherine looked up sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "Your father's will named you his heir," Isaiah said. "The land is yours, Katherine, and while the house and barn are gone, the property itself has value." "I can't rebuild alone," she said, the words seeming to cost her. "No," Isaiah agreed. "But you don't have to sell either. I have a proposition." He outlined his idea. He would help her rebuild the Hayes ranch, starting with fences and corrals, eventually a small cabin. In exchange, they would run their cattle together, sharing resources and profits. It wasn't charity, it made good business sense for both of them. "Why would you do this?" Katherine asked, searching his face. Isaiah considered his words carefully. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said finally. 10 years ago, I lost my wife and infant son to fever. The only thing that kept me going was having this land to work. I can't give you back your family, Katherine, but I can help you hold onto their legacy." It was the most he'd revealed of himself since she'd arrived, and Katherine saw him differently in that moment, not just as the neighbor offering help, but as someone who understood the landscape of loss she was traversing. "I'd like to try," she said softly, "to rebuild." The next day marked the beginning of their partnership. Isaiah rode with Katherine to her land, and together they walked the property boundaries, making plans. It would take time, he warned her. Years, perhaps, to fully restore what had been lost. But they would start small, a fence here, a shelter there. "The first step," Isaiah said, driving a stake into the ground where they'd build a new corral, "is claiming your space again." As winter approached, their work on the Hayes property had to be scaled back, but Isaiah surprised Katherine by bringing her a gift one evening, a calf, just weaned with a white star on its forehead. "Every ranch needs to start somewhere," he said. "This little lady comes from good stock. In a few years, she'll be the foundation of your herd." Katherine stroked the calf's soft nose, fighting tears. It seemed such a small thing against all she had lost, but it was a beginning, a promise of a future she hadn't been able to imagine mere months ago. "I'll name her Hope," she decided, and Isaiah nodded approvingly. The Montana winter was harsh, keeping them mostly confined to Isaiah's ranch. Katherine used the time to plan, drawing up designs for the simple cabin they would build in spring, calculating costs, and learning everything she could about cattle breeding from Isaiah's small library of agricultural books. On Christmas Day, Isaiah gave her another gift, a handcrafted wooden box. "For your papers," he explained as she opened it, "and anything else you want to keep safe." Katherine ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the intricate carving of wild roses along the lid, her mother's favorite flower. "When did you make this?" she asked, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Evenings," Isaiah shrugged. "It gave my hands something to do." She'd noticed his restlessness at night, the way he'd sit by the fire whittling or mending tack long after the day's work was done. Now she understood it was his way of managing his own ghosts. Katherine had managed to save enough from her wages to buy Isaiah a new winter coat. The old one being patched in so many places, it barely kept out the wind. His pleased surprise at receiving a gift, as if he'd grown unaccustomed to such ordinary kindnesses, made her realize how solitary his life had been before she'd arrived. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Katherine felt a subtle shift in her grief. It hadn't lessened exactly, but had somehow transformed into something she could carry while still moving forward. And Isaiah, with his quiet strength and unwavering support, had become more than just a benefactor. He was a friend, perhaps the only true friend she had left in the world. Spring 1877 arrived with a riot of wildflowers across the plains and renewed energy for their building project. Isaiah hired 2 additional hands for his own ranch operations, so he could dedicate time to helping Katherine reconstruct the Hayes property. They began with the corral and a small shelter for the animals, which now included Hope the heifer. 2 horses Isaiah had purchased at a good price from a rancher moving east, and a small flock of chickens that a neighboring farmer's wife had gifted Katherine. "A woman needs her own egg money," Mrs. Peterson had said when delivering the half-dozen hens and a rooster. "Independence is important, especially out here." Katherine appreciated both the gift and the sentiment. Though grateful for Isaiah's help, she was determined to build something that was truly hers, something that honored her parents' hard work while forging her own path. The cabin raising took place in early May. Isaiah had quietly spread the word among neighboring ranchers, and on a clear Saturday morning, wagons began arriving at the Hayes property, men with tools, women with food for the workers. Katherine stood speechless as families she'd known all her life came to help rebuild what she had lost. "You're not alone, Katherine," Mrs. Peterson said, patting her hand. "Never were." Isaiah worked alongside the other men, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his forearms as he helped position the heavy logs that would form the cabin walls. Katherine caught herself watching him more than once, noting the easy way he led without commanding, the respect the other men showed him despite his generally reserved nature. By sundown, the basic structure was complete, a small but solid one-room cabin with a stone fireplace. It would need a proper roof, windows, and finishing inside, but it was tangible progress, the first real piece of her former life restored. As the neighbors departed, Katherine stood beside Isaiah, gazing at the structure silhouetted against the setting sun. "Thank you," she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate, Isaiah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You'll be able to move in by summer's end," he said, "though you're welcome to stay at my place until you're fully settled." "I'd like that," Katherine replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Somewhere in the past months, Isaiah's ranch had begun to feel like home. Throughout that summer, they fell into a rhythm, dividing their time between Isaiah's established ranch and Katherine's emerging one. They would rise before dawn, tend to Isaiah's cattle and property, then spend afternoons at the Hayes land, gradually bringing it back to life. Katherine learned everything she could about ranching, not just the bookkeeping she'd done for her father, but the practical skills of animal husbandry, fence mending, and basic veterinary care. Isaiah proved a patient teacher, never making her feel less for what she didn't know, always matter-of-factly showing her what needed to be done. "You've got a natural way with the horses," he commented one evening as they rode back to his ranch after a long day. "Better than most men I've seen." Katherine smiled, pleased by the genuine compliment. "My mother was the horsewoman in our family," she said. "Papa used to joke that she could whisper to them." "You must take after her then," Isaiah replied. "In some ways," Katherine said, the memory bittersweet. "She was more graceful, though. And she could make anything grow: flowers, vegetables, children." She paused, realizing she'd spoken of her family without the immediate stab of pain that usually accompanied such memories. "Tell me more about them," Isaiah said quietly, "if you want to." So as they rode beneath the vast Montana sky, Katherine began to share stories: her father's terrible singing voice that scared the cows, her mother's famous apple pies, her brother's knack for finding trouble. Small memories, ordinary ones, but precious for that very reason. Isaiah listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed he was truly interested, not merely being polite. When they reached his ranch, Katherine felt lighter somehow, as if speaking her family's stories aloud had transformed them from wounds into treasures she could carry. By late August, the cabin was finished enough for habitation, simply furnished with a bed, table, and chairs that Isaiah had either made himself or traded for with neighbors. Catherine's small collection of rescued and gifted items made it feel increasingly like home. The wooden box Isaiah had carved, containing her family papers and locket, Mrs. Peterson's quilt on the bed, cookware from various neighbors, and books that Isaiah had quietly added to her shelf when he thought she wasn't looking. The day she officially moved from Isaiah's spare room to her own cabin was bittersweet. Though it represented a crucial step in reclaiming her independence, Katherine was surprised by how much she would miss the quiet evenings on Isaiah's porch, their conversations over meals, even the comforting sound of him moving about the house as she fell asleep. "You'll be just over the ridge," Isaiah reminded her as he helped carry the last of her belongings into the cabin. "And I'll be checking in daily until we finish the well." Katherine nodded, arranging her few possessions with care. "It feels strange," she admitted. "Starting over in the same place, but everything being different." Isaiah paused in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. "Different doesn't always mean worse," he said. "Just new." That night, her first alone in the cabin, Katherine found it difficult to sleep despite her exhaustion. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the occasional call of night birds or distant coyotes. She found herself listening for Isaiah's footsteps, the creak of his chair by the fire, sounds that had become comforting in their familiarity. When she finally slept, she dreamed of fire, as she often did. But this time, instead of waking in terror, the dream shifted to rain, gentle, cleansing rain that washed away the ash and revealed new green shoots pushing through the soil. She woke feeling strangely hopeful. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Katherine settled into her new routine. She cared for her small but growing collection of livestock, added a vegetable garden beside the cabin, and rode daily to help with work at Isaiah's ranch as repayment for his ongoing assistance. Their partnership flourished. Isaiah's quiet efficiency complemented Katherine's meticulous planning, and together, they managed both properties more successfully than either could have alone. Neighbors began to comment on how well the arrangement worked, though some raised eyebrows at the unconventional situation, a young woman living alone, working so closely with a bachelor rancher. "People are talking," Mrs. Peterson warned Katherine one Sunday after church. "Not that I pay gossip any mind, but others might not be so charitable." Katherine straightened her shoulders. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "Mr. Evans has been nothing but respectful, and I won't repay his kindness with ingratitude because of wagging tongues." Nevertheless, the conversation made her more aware of how their relationship might appear to others, and, if she was honest with herself, more aware of Isaiah himself. The way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. How his hands, strong enough to break a wild horse, could be gentle when delivering a calf or mending an injured bird's wing. The quiet intelligence behind his economical words. One crisp October afternoon, as they worked together repairing her corral, Katherine found herself watching Isaiah as he skillfully shaped a replacement post. Something warm and unfamiliar fluttered in her chest, a feeling she wasn't ready to name but couldn't entirely ignore. "Is something wrong?" Isaiah asked, catching her gaze. Katherine quickly looked away. "No, just thinking about how much has changed in a year." Isaiah nodded, hammering the post into place. "Winter will be here soon," he observed. You're first in the cabin. We should make sure you're properly prepared." His concern was practical, not personal, Katherine reminded herself. Yet she couldn't help but notice how often he said, "we now," rather than "you" or "I," as if their fates had become entwined somewhere along the way. The second winter proved easier than the first. Though Catherine's grief remained, it no longer consumed her entirely. Her cabin was snug and warm, her small herd weathering the cold in the sturdy shelter she and Isaiah had built. Most days, despite the snow, she made the ride to his ranch to help with chores and share the evening meal. On days when the weather made travel impossible, Katherine was surprised to find she missed Isaiah's company intensely. Their conversations had evolved from purely practical matters to deeper discussions about books they'd read, memories of their childhoods, even tentative dreams for the future. Christmas that year was celebrated at Catherine's cabin. She'd spent days preparing special dishes, using precious supplies of sugar and dried fruit to make a cake that nearly matched her mother's recipe. Isaiah arrived carrying gifts, practical items like new work gloves and lamp oil, but also a delicate silver hairpin he'd ordered from a catalog. "It reminded me of something your mother might have worn," he said awkwardly as Katherine opened the small package. "From the photograph in your locket." Katherine was touched that he'd noticed such a detail. "It's beautiful," she said, immediately pinning her simply arranged hair with it. "How does it look?" Isaiah's gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. "Perfect," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "I mean, it suits you." Katherine had made him a scarf, carefully knitted during the long evenings alone, and a new journal bound in leather for his ranch accounts. Simple gifts, but chosen with thought. As they sat before her fire, sharing a rare bottle of wine Isaiah had brought, Katherine realized with sudden clarity that this felt like home, not just the cabin, but this quiet companionship, this gentle understanding between them. "A penny for your thoughts," Isaiah said, noticing her pensive expression. Katherine smiled. "I was just thinking that a year ago I couldn't imagine ever feeling at peace again, yet here we are." Isaiah's expression softened. "Here we are," he agreed, raising his cup in a silent toast. Neither spoke the words forming in their hearts, but something shifted between them that night, a recognition of possibilities that hadn't existed before. Spring 1878 brought new beginnings. Hope, Catherine's first heifer, delivered a healthy calf, symbolically marking the true rebirth of the Hayes Ranch. Isaiah surprised Katherine by arranging the purchase of 10 more head of cattle, young cows of good breeding that would form the foundation of a proper herd. "I can't accept this," Katherine protested when he told her. "It's too much." "It's an investment," Isaiah corrected her. "In our partnership, the agreement was to run our herds together, remember? This benefits us both." Katherine knew there was more to it than business sense, but she accepted with grace, recognizing the gift for what it truly was, another piece of her lost life restored through Isaiah's quiet generosity. As the land greened and wildflowers carpeted the plains once more, their work fell into a pleasant rhythm. They expanded both properties, hired an additional hand to help with the increased workload, and began to see real profits from their joint ventures. One warm May evening, they sat on Catherine's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that comes only with deep familiarity. "I've been thinking," Isaiah said finally, his voice unusually hesitant, "about making some changes." Katherine turned to look at him, noting the tension in his shoulders. "What kind of changes?" Isaiah stared at the horizon. "The practical thing would be to combine our operations more formally. It would save us both time, resources." "We're already partners in most ways," Katherine pointed out, puzzled by his serious tone. Isaiah nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Yes, but I'm thinking of something more. Permanent. The meaning behind his words slowly dawned on Katherine, sending a flush of warmth to her cheeks. Are you proposing a business merger, Mr. Evans, or something else entirely? She asked softly. Finally, Isaiah turned to face her, his storm-colored eyes intense. Both, I suppose, though I'm making a poor job of it. He took a deep breath. Katherine, I never expected to want a family again after losing mine. But this past year and a half, working alongside you, seeing your strength and determination, I've come to care for you deeply. Katherine felt her heart quicken. Isaiah, you don't need to answer now, he said quickly. I know this might seem sudden, though it doesn't feel sudden to me. I just wanted you to know that if you ever might consider me as more than a neighbor or partner, I would be honored to court you properly. The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This wasn't a proposal born of convenience or practicality, despite his framing. It was the revelation of feelings that had been growing quietly between them for months. It doesn't seem sudden to me either, Katherine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And yes, I would very much like for you to court me, Isaiah Evans. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, rare and breathtaking. Carefully, as if she might shatter under his touch, Isaiah reached for her hand. When their fingers intertwined, it felt to Katherine like another piece of her heart, one she hadn't even realized was missing, had been gently restored. Isaiah took his courting duties seriously. Though they continued working together daily, he now made formal calls at Katherine's cabin on Sunday afternoons, dressed in his best clothes and often bearing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, once a kitten from a litter born in his barn. Every ranch needs a mouser, he said as the tiny calico explored Katherine's cabin. And every home needs something to care for. Katherine named the kitten Penny for her copper-colored patches and found unexpected joy in the creature's playful antics. It was another small addition to her rebuilding life, another living thing to love. Their courtship progressed with the unhurried pace of people who knew they had found something rare and worth savoring. Isaiah took Katherine on proper outings, picnics by the creek that ran through both their properties, a trip to town for the Independence Day celebration, even a carefully planned dinner at the hotel restaurant in Helena when they traveled there for cattle business. Through it all, their working partnership continued to thrive. Katherine's ranch grew steadily more prosperous, with nearly 30 head of cattle now grazing her restored pastures. The cabin had been expanded to include a proper kitchen and sitting room, and Katherine had planted a garden that rivaled her mother's, with vegetables for practical use and flowers for beauty. You've accomplished so much in 2 years, Isaiah commented one evening as they walked the boundary between their properties. Most men couldn't have done half as well. Not without help, Katherine said honestly. Everything I have now, every piece that's been restored, has your hand in it somewhere. Isaiah shook his head. I may have provided some means, but the vision and determination were all yours, Katherine. Never doubt that. As summer faded into autumn once more, their feelings deepened into something neither could have anticipated when they first met beside the ashes of Katherine's former life. What had begun as compassion on Isaiah's part and desperate gratitude on Katherine's had transformed into a love built on mutual respect, shared work, and genuine understanding. On a golden September evening, Isaiah asked Katherine to ride with him to a particular spot overlooking both their ranches, a small hill where the view stretched for miles across the Montana landscape. I come here sometimes to think, Isaiah said as they stood side by side, their horses grazing nearby. I can see everything from here, your land, mine, the way they fit together. Katherine nodded, appreciating the perspective. From this vantage point, the boundaries between the Hayes and Evans ranches seemed arbitrary, the land flowing naturally from one property to the other. Isaiah turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Katherine, when I found you 2 years ago, I only wanted to help someone in need. I never imagined you would help me just as much, maybe more. Katherine squeezed his hands encouragingly. How did I help you? By making me live again, not just exist, Isaiah said simply. For years after losing Sarah and the baby, I was just going through the motions. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really feeling anything. You changed that. You made me remember what it means to care, to hope, to look forward to each new day. Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. You did the same for me, she whispered. When I lost everything, you didn't just give me shelter or help rebuild my ranch. You gave me a reason to keep going. Isaiah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he said, his voice husky with emotion. It was my mother's. From the pouch, he drew a simple gold band set with a small pearl. It's not fancy, he apologized, but it's been in my family for generations. Katherine's breath caught as Isaiah lowered himself to one knee before her. Katherine Hayes, I love you, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love working beside you and resting beside you. I love who I am when I'm with you. His voice grew more confident with each word. I want to build a life with you, not just adjoining ranches or a business partnership, but a true union. Will you marry me? Tears flowed freely down Katherine's cheeks now, but they were tears of joy so different from the tears of devastation she had shed the day they met. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Isaiah Evans, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Katherine felt a sense of completion, as if the final, most important piece of what she had lost had been restored. Not in the same form, but in a new one that honored the past, while embracing the future. Isaiah stood and drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and promises yet to be made. As they held each other on the hilltop, with their land spread out below them and the endless Montana sky above, Katherine knew that what had begun in ashes had been transformed into something far more precious than what was lost. Their wedding took place in late November, after the fall cattle drive, but before the heavy winter snows. The small church in town was decorated with evergreen boughs and late-blooming chrysanthemums, and nearly every rancher and farmer in the county attended. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue silk, not white, as she felt that would have been pretending she was still the innocent girl she'd been before the fire. Isaiah had commissioned it specially from Helena, another piece of her new life that acknowledged both loss and renewal. Mrs. Peterson helped Katherine prepare in the small room behind the church. Your parents would be so proud of you, the older woman said, securing the silver hairpin Isaiah had given her last Christmas. Not just for surviving, but for thriving. Katherine touched her mother's locket, which she wore on a new chain. I wish they could be here, she said softly. They are in their way, Mrs. Peterson assured her. In everything you've rebuilt, in the woman you've become. When Katherine walked down the aisle toward Isaiah, she carried those words with her. Her groom waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. The love and admiration in his gaze filled Katherine with certainty that this step, like every step they had taken together over the past 2 years, was right. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged the losses they had each endured and the future they were choosing to build together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah's kiss was both tender and passionate, a fitting beginning to this new chapter. The celebration afterward was held at Isaiah's ranch, which would now be their shared home. Katherine had decided to maintain her separate cabin as a place for housing ranch hands as their operation grew, another practical decision that honored the work they had put into restoring her property. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard where neighbors danced to fiddle music, Isaiah led Katherine away from the festivities for a moment of quiet. "I have one more gift for you," he said, guiding her toward the barn. Inside, he led her to a stall where a magnificent chestnut mare stood watching them with intelligent eyes. "She's from the Peterson stock," Isaiah explained, "descended from the same bloodline as your mother's favorite riding horse." Katherine approached the mare slowly, extending her hand. The horse nickered softly and pushed her velvet nose against Katherine's palm in greeting. "How did you know?" Katherine asked, deeply moved. "About my mother's horse. You mentioned it once months ago," Isaiah said. "I've been working with Peterson since then to find the right mare." Katherine stroked the horse's gleaming neck, overcome with emotion. "You've been planning this for that long?" Isaiah stepped closer, slipping his arm around her waist. "I've been planning for our future since the moment I realized I loved you," he said. "This is just one small piece of it." Katherine turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who was now her husband. "When I lost everything, I never imagined I could be happy again," she said. "You didn't just help me rebuild my ranch, Isaiah. Piece by piece, day by day, you helped me rebuild myself." "We rebuilt each other," Isaiah corrected gently, pressing his forehead to hers. "And we'll keep building our ranches, our home, our family together." As they rejoined their wedding celebration, Katherine looked around at the smiling faces of neighbors who had become friends, at the land that had been restored from ashes, at the man whose quiet strength had given her the foundation to rebuild her life. Each element was a piece carefully restored, not identical to what was lost, but in many ways richer for having been reclaimed through love, determination, and the passage of time. Over the next 3 years, the Evans Ranch flourished under their joint care. They expanded operations, improved their breeding stock, and built a reputation throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair business practices. The Hayes land, now officially part of their combined holdings, but still bearing Katherine's family name, produced abundant hay and grain. In the spring of 1881, their family grew with the birth of twins, a boy they named James after Katherine's father, and a girl they called Sarah, honoring the wife Isaiah had lost while creating a new legacy. Katherine's joy at becoming a mother was doubled by watching Isaiah embrace fatherhood again. His gentle care with their infant's healing wounds she knew he had carried silently for years. "They're perfect," Isaiah whispered one evening as they stood over the cradles he had crafted himself, watching their children sleep. "They are," Katherine agreed, leaning into his embrace. "And so is this all of it." On the 5th anniversary of the fire that had taken everything from Katherine, she and Isaiah rode together to the small cemetery where her family rested. The twins, now active toddlers, remained at home with Mrs. Peterson, who had become like a grandmother to them. Katherine placed wildflowers on each grave, then stood beside Isaiah in contemplative silence. The pain of her loss had not vanished, it never would, but it had transformed into something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. "I used to wonder why I was the one who survived," she said quietly. "Why I was left alone." Isaiah took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "And now," Katherine looked up at him, at the face that had become as dear to her as her own reflection. "Now I know that endings can also be beginnings," she said. And that sometimes, when we lose everything, we create space for something we never could have imagined. As they rode back toward home, toward their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, and the life they had built together, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the ashes of devastating loss had risen something phoenix-like in its beauty and strength. A love that had restored, piece by precious piece, everything she had thought was lost forever. Not in the same form, but in one that honored both the past and the future, they continued to build together, day by day, with patience, determination, and unwavering love.